Thanks, Linda. I'm just sharing my screen now. Okay. No. Okay, great. Thanks, Linda. Yeah, so my name is Mary Lenahan and I work with the Food Safety Authority of Ireland. So today you're going to hear about a lot of different types of fermented products, but on my talk is going to cover raw, fermented, ready-to-eat meat products. I thought I'd start off as the first speaker just to have a slide cover off what is fermentation. So at a very simple level, it's a process that converts carbohydrates such as sugar or starch to alcohol or organic acids as byproducts. It does this by using microorganisms such as yeast or bacteria, and these grow under anaerobic conditions. Traditionally, natural microflora were used as the starter cultures for fermented foods, but nowadays it's more typical to use commercially available starter cultures because it's a more controlled fermentation process. The starter cultures, their characteristics are well known, and the user can select the particular starter cultures that are typical for the type of product they want to make. The reasons for carrying out fermentation include increasing food safety, and that's what I'm going to mainly talk to you about today. It also prolongs the shelf life of the product. It does this by lowering the pH of the product, and the water activity is lowered, particularly the longer the product is dried out for fermented meats. Starter cultures also work as a competitive microorganism in the product. So it grows and it inhibits the growth of other bacteria that you might not want, such as spoilage bacteria or pathogenic bacteria. And fermentation also produces certain product characteristics that are desirable, such as the flavor, the texture, the color of the product. For raw fermented meat, this typically is a meat product that consists of maybe minced or chopped raw meat, and it's mixed with fat and other ingredients. So this is referred to as the meat batter. The other ingredients can include preservatives such as nitrate, spices, sugar, the microbial starter culture, and these are all stuffed into a natural or synthetic casing. So basically, the starter culture metabolizes the sugar or the starch that's in the food, in the meat batter, and as it grows, it produces acids such as lactic acid or alcohol as a byproduct. In terms of lactic acid, this drops the pH, and it, then it produces a safer kind of background for the pathogens, so they won't grow in the product. At the same time, if the meat product is left to mature or ripen, it dries out the product, so the water migrates to the product surface and it evaporates, and this decreases the water activity, or the AW. And this process in combination with decreasing the pH really is how we're ensuring the food safety of the raw fermented meat product. At the same time, when drying occurs, it can produce certain kind of sensory properties that are desirable, such as a certain flavor, a certain texture, and this all combines together to produce the raw meat product that you want. So today I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of Guidance Note 33, which is the Food Safety Authority's guidance to good manufacturing practices for the production of ready-to-eat raw fermented meat products. So any of the detail that you require really go to this guidance, so I'm just going to give you a summary of it today. The reasons for fermenting meat include increasing the product safety, preserving the product. I suppose many years ago there were no fridges or freezers available, so a way to preserve meat was important, and this is one of the techniques that was developed. It can increase the shelf life. If fermentation of raw meat is done correctly, it can actually make the product shelf stable, so it doesn't need to be refrigerated. Counteract the rancidity of fats. As I mentioned, develop certain flavors and taste. This can be due to some of the byproducts, such as the organic acids. Improve the texture and improve digestibility. So fermentation is a really old preservation technique, and the origins of fermented meat is thought to come from the Middle East region from about 1500 BC. But in Ireland, we had no established history of producing raw fermented meat products. But I suppose in recent years, there's been more of these products on the market here, both produced domestically and imported into the country. Many of these products are produced by small food businesses in Ireland, and they usually use techniques that are borrowed from Northern and Southern European traditions of making raw fermented meats. Broadly speaking, the types of fermented meat can be split into 4 different categories, depending on how long the product is dried for. So you have between moist, semi-dry, dry, and very dry. So obviously the moist one is it's dried for a much shorter period of time. The very dry one is left for a very long maturing or ripening time. And these all have different characteristics in terms of their final pH, their final water activity, the temperature that's used to ferment the product, how long it's left to ferment, the temperature that's used to mature or ripen the product or age the product, and the time that's left for. And then the expected weight loss at the end of the product when the product's ready to go on the market. So it'll range from 10% up to more than 30% for those very dry fermented meats. So really, it's important that the food business that's making these products understands these characteristics, and it's really their knowledge and experience of the different types of products they're making that are critical to ensure the product is produced safely and properly. In terms of what keeps the fermented meat safe, there's no kind of one thing, it's a combination of things, which is referred to in microbiology as microbiological hurdles. So if you can imagine you have a bacteria, it may get over 1 or 2 of those steps, but combined it's really strong, and that really increases the food safety. So things like preservatives, such as salt or nitrate, these really prevent the growth of pathogens. So for example, Clostridium botulinum or Listeria monocytogenes. Then as the bacteria and the meat batter start to grow, they change the atmosphere, they reduce the amount of oxygen available. So it basically provides a selective advantage for the starter culture, which are generally anaerobic to grow, and they like to grow in conditions where there's not much oxygen. These starter cultures are competitive microflora. So as I mentioned, these grow and they compete with the natural microflora that's in the meat batter. So this could be spoilage microorganisms, this could be pathogens. So basically they're growing so well that they're not leaving any space for any other undesirable bacteria to grow. As the starter culture grows, it drops the pH, and basically the lower the pH, the safer the product. Generally, the recommended final pH is around less than 5.3. Most will achieve a pH of less than 5. Depending on the type of product, it might even go lower. So it really depends on the type of product that you're making and the type of starter culture that's used. And then the last part is really dropping the water activity. So basically, this is part of the ripening step or the maturing step. And it depends how long that product is left to age or mature, and what the temperature is for that age or that drying one. As I mentioned, the longer it's left to dry, the more dried the sausage is, the more water loss that you'll get from that particular product. So all of these things combined really improve the food safety of the product. In terms of food safety considerations, I suppose raw meat itself is an optimal substrate for the growth of bacteria. It has a fairly neutral pH, it has good water available for the bacteria to grow, it has plenty of nutrients. So meat itself, fresh meat, is very susceptible to microbial spoilage. Meat may also contain bacteria that cause food poisoning, such as that are referred to as pathogens. And these could be Salmonella, Shiga toxin producing E. coli or STEC, Listeria monocytogenes, Clostridium botulinum. So as I mentioned many years ago, there were no fridges, there was no freezer. So a way of preserving meat was really critical to suppress the growth of these microorganisms, be they spoilage or be they pathogenic. Nowadays, I suppose we have fridges, we have freezers, but as I said, if the products are fermented correctly, they can actually be shelf stable. So the most critical part when it comes to controlling food safety is having a good food safety management system in place. So that consists of good prerequisite programs, PRPs, and HACCP-based procedures. And these are required to control the growth of undesirable microorganisms and prevent recontamination of the product when the final fermentation has occurred. So many of the meat products that I'm talking about today, they won't have been subjected to a heat treatment. So they're consumed as a raw product and they're ready to eat. So it's really important that the food safety of these is taken care of and that they're a good, safe product to eat. Food safety relies on the quality of the ingredients, and this is critical, particularly to ensure that the ingredients that you're using are not already contaminated with pathogens. The experience of the food business and their understanding of the complex processes that take place during the production of the raw fermented meat is critical. And they need to be able to identify what are the hazards that they need to control and ensure they have critical control points, or CCPs, in place to identify those and monitor them. And they monitor these under their HACCP-based procedures. So things like the air and the product temperature in the fermentation stage, the pH, the final pH that's achieved in the product, the final water activity that's achieved in the product, the relative humidity and the air velocity in the drying chamber, and how much weight loss is expected for that product. All of these things are critical control points that might be considered. So if you look in Guidance Note 33, Appendix 5, there's a lot more detail around those particular points that might need to be controlled. The quality of ingredients are essential. Always use good quality drinking water. Water is not used really, not much water will be used as an ingredient, but if it is going to be used as an ingredient, it's important that it's of good quality. Water that's used for the hygiene programs needs to be of good quality. When using meat for your product, make sure that it's a good quality meat that's fresh and lean, and it needs to be of good microbiological quality. So ideally an aerobic colony count, ACC, of less than 10,000 CFU, or colony forming units per gram. It's best to avoid using cheap meats or trims. These might have a higher level of microbial contamination. They also might have a higher fat level. So some of the products will need to have a certain amount of fat on their recipe, but if there's too much fat in those particular products, it will impact how much that product will dry out in the final maturation stage. It's also important to remember that other ingredients that you might use in your process, such as herbs or spices, could be a potential source of microbial contamination. And I suppose it's important to control all of the ingredients that you are using for your product, and to buy them from reputable sources, have good supplier control. It would be best practice to agree a customer specification with the suppliers that you're buying those products from. And in that, you can agree that, say, for the meat that you're using, they have to test it every so often for certain pathogens and provide sorts of analysis to show you that there was no pathogens detected in that product. If you are agreeing a customer specification, make sure you have actions agreed in that on what will happen if there is a pathogen detected in that product. I mentioned starter cultures. So usually commercial starter cultures are used these days, and these are used rather than natural microflora because it improves the control you have on the process to ensure you have a consistent product and you know the characteristics of the strain, so you can ensure the safety or the quality of the product. It would be best to use starter cultures that can compete successfully with the natural occurring microorganisms in the meat batter. You need to ensure the starter cultures are non-pathogenic, so these are microbiologically safe, and that they can produce a controlled and rapid pH reduction in the meat batter would be ideal. Some of these starter cultures also produce naturally antimicrobials, such as bacteriocins, and these also will help control the level of spoilage bacteria growing in the background, microflora and pathogens. Follow all of the manufacturer's instructions for use and storage of these starter cultures, and do not use a starter culture that's past its shelf life because it might not grow properly. In terms of the legal requirements, you have the general legal requirements around the obligation to produce safe food under 178. Food business operators also have to have prerequisite requirement programs in place, and there are hazard-based procedures under Regulation 852. There's some specific requirements for foods of animal origin that you may need to comply with under Regulation 853. And then we have the microbiological criteria, and this is listed in Commission Regulation 2073 of 2005. So there will be some criteria in that raw fermented meat needs to comply with. And there's also national guideline microbiological criteria for ready-to-eat food placed on the market in Guidance Note 3. So I suppose these products are raw, ready-to-eat meats, so they will have to comply with some of those criteria. I just list them here. In terms of the legal criteria, you have food category 1.1 or 1.2 for Listeria monocytogenes and ready-to-eat food. Which food category the product falls into will depend on the characteristics of your final product in terms of its pH, its water activity, and any of these that have a lower pH, according to the footnote as I've listed here on the slide, will fall into category 1.3. Everything else by default goes into category 1.2. There is a food category 1.8 in the legislation for Salmonella species in raw, ready-to-eat fermented meat products. So these will have to comply with that. And then bear in mind there might also be some hygiene criteria that might be applicable for the ingredients, so such as raw meat. In terms of other hazards, Shiga toxin producing E. coli, STEC might be considered a hazard, so have a think about that. It might depend on what ingredients you're using in your fermented meat. So if you're using something like beef or lamb, they're more likely to be contaminated with STEC, so you might consider that a relevant hazard. There have been occasional outbreaks linked to fermented meats associated with STEC worldwide. You might also want to monitor Listeria species, non-monocytogenes as a hygiene indicator, and E. coli as an indicator of fecal contamination. Both of these are hygiene indicators. So if you find them in your product, it doesn't mean that there's pathogens present, but it means that the conditions are right that maybe pathogens might be present. And if you go to Guidance Note 3, it'll give you criteria for those and actions to take if there's higher levels than you should have in your product. And then the last thing I'd say is when you are getting your fermented meat products or any fermented food tested, do not test for aerobic colony counts, ACCs, also known as total viable counts or TVCs. And the reason for this is you've deliberately added a starter culture. So you're just counting all of the bacteria you've deliberately added into that product. This is just a generic test and it's not telling you anything when it comes to fermented meat. So in summary, if you go to Guidance Note 33, it'll give you a lot of the detail that I just covered in a kind of a summary level today. Really, the safe manufacture of raw, ready-to-eat fermented meats relies on best quality ingredients, have a good control of your supplier, have a customer specification, ensure that you're applying good hygiene and manufacturing practices, know your product, really know what's keeping it safe, know what the hazards are, and ensure that you're monitoring those as critical control points and that you've actions documented in your food safety management system, corrective actions, if any of those control points are out of spec. And that's for me today. So I'm going to hand you over to my colleague, Cormac. Thanks.